Good morning, everyone. Hello, good morning. So welcome to day 3 of the 2016 Metta Convention here at Uluru, Australia. Just some quick housekeeping points before we start. Make sure your mobile phones are turned off or set to silent throughout the day. Number 2, for those of you who don't know, toilets are located out through these doors and to the right. You can also use the toilets at Sales at the public area. And we're also filming today's convention. You'll see the cameras at the back of the room there. So if possible, for those of you who are sitting in this area in the centre aisle, if you need to leave for whatever reason during the talk, if we can ask you to avoid using the centre aisle and go out the side, that would be great. So now we are going to start the convention. And I'll get off the stage. Thank you.
Metta around the world, Metta light the world. All beings long to come home, to feel the motherly love, flowing soft and gently, healing our hearts to be free. May all suffering beings be free from suffering. Those in sorrow be free from sorrow. Those in fear and dangers, be free from fear and dangers. May all beings be well and happy. May all beings be well and happy.
Oh, this thing clock. Rostrum. Rostrum. Thank you. Let us commence with some meditation. If you like to adjust your body to an upright or relaxed position, keep your head upright, just tuck in your chin a little. Feel your shoulder joints relax. You may choose to close or half close your eyes. Bring your attention within. Bring your attention close to your heart. Observe the calm, the quietness within. Remain in this state of calm and quietness for a few moments, with clear sense of awareness. Whatever phenomena that arises, the sounds that you hear, feeling, sensation that arises, you have clear awareness of them. Your mind is not disturbed, not distracted. In this state of calm and quietness, you will commence with the practice of Metta, of loving kindness, wishing yourselves to be well and happy. As you wish yourselves well and happy, feel a sense of well-being. Thank you. Keep a smile in your hearts. Be free from anger, free from enmity, from hatred and grudges, free from sufferings, from fear, from worries, from anxieties, and just dwell in calm and peace. Just as you wish to be well, happy, calm, and peaceful, you will now spread our loving kindness all around you. Feel the calm, the quietness within, radiating above, below, and all around you. Fill this whole hall with your aura of calm and peace, and a good wish in your hearts that all who are present be well and happy. Going beyond the confines of this hall, keep on radiating loving kindness, the whole building and all the surrounding areas, covering the whole premises of the cells. And beyond this premises, to all the surroundings, to the whole township of Ilara. And to Uluru and Katayuta National Park. Reaching out to the whole country, and beyond this country, to all the neighboring countries, all the neighboring islands, covering the whole world. And all the realms of existence, known or unknown to us, seen or unseen. That may all beings be well and happy. May they be free from harm, free from dangers. May they dwell in peace and harmony. You will now extend loving kindness to those who are near and dear to you, including your parents, mother, father, those who are living, brothers and sisters and other family members, teachers, relatives and friends, whoever that comes to your mind, wherever they are. Have the good wish for them all, that they be well and happy. May they be free from anger, free from enmity, from hatred and grudges. May they be free from sufferings, from fear, from worries, from anxieties. May they dwell in peace and harmony. May all those who are near and dear to us be well and happy. May they be free from harm, free from dangers. May they dwell in peace and harmony. You will also extend loving kindness to those who are less well known to you, or even unknown to you, including those that are present here. Those in the surroundings, within the premises of the sales, and all the surroundings, all the neighborhood unknown to us. Have good wish for them all, that they be well and happy. May they be free from harm, free from dangers. May they dwell in peace and harmony. Also extend loving kindness to those who are unfriendly towards you. If you feel comfortable, think of them. Those with whom you have had quarrels or misunderstandings or simply unfriendly, wherever they are, may they be well and happy. May they be free from anger, free from enmity, free from sufferings, from fear, from worries, from anxieties. May they dwell in peace and harmony. That may all beings be well and happy. All beings be well and happy. Fill your hearts with pure love and compassion, and cherish the good wish that all suffering beings be free from suffering. Those in sorrow be free from sorrow. Those in fear and dangers, may they be free from fear and dangers. That may all beings be well and happy. All beings be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Just a few words on the cultivation of metta. Metta is the Pali word. In Sanskrit, it is Maitreya. The closest language to the Western languages is agape. When translated into English, it can be translated as most widely known as loving kindness or compassionate love. It is also translated as a boundless love, universal love. And there are some 529 different ways how we can cultivate this practice of loving kindness. Traditionally, we would cultivate loving kindness to radiate loving kindness in all the 10 directions. Beginning, we can do it in all the north, northeast, east, south, east, south, southwest, west, southeast, southwest, northwest, and then return to north, above and below. That covers the 10 directions. We can also do, starting from where we are, in the own space that we are, and then we spread out in all the directions to the whole village, the whole suburb, and eventually the whole city, the whole country, and the whole world. And what has been prescribed, what the Buddha prescribed was, we first cultivate that within ourselves to feel that sense of well-being and happiness. In the Pali language is Avira Homi Abhyapaya Homi. There's a very popular song called Metta, Loving Kindness, that you can download from the website. Yeah. And it means to be free from anger, free from enmity. And after you can feel that sense of calm and quietness within, and then you spread out to those who are near and dear to you. Those who come to those who are unfriendly towards us, our enemies or rivals. In this manner, we practice step by step, until that love, that compassionate love, transcend all boundaries. And that is why it has been called boundless love. So please, throughout the convention, for the next day or so, and those of you going on the extended tour, keep this to heart. When you apply loving kindness, my teacher taught me how to do it. First, just do it yourself. In a guided meditation, it's very general. But when you do it individually, it must suit yourself. Any time that you feel angry, every time that you feel upset, just pause and tell yourself to be well. You have to be mindful of your state of mind. And as soon as you are mindful, you apply the practice of mindfulness, you immediately step out of that state of mind. And then you apply this formula, be well, be happy, or just say metta, whatever it is. And then after that, when you can do that, then try to do it towards others. That is why we don't have to go around wishing people, hi, good morning. Do you really mean, when you say good morning, good day, do you really mean? But if we internalize our practice from our hearts, we just wish one another to really have a good day, that the day will be meaningful, will be at peace, will have harmony, and they can grow in wisdom and compassion. Thank you.
Venerable Mahinda, respected members of the Mahasangha, distinguished guests, speakers, brothers and sisters in the Dharma. Before we start with today's program for the speakers, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on how special and unique yesterday was. So if everyone can just take a moment to think about the time they spent at Uluru at sunrise, celebrating Bante's birthday together, the afternoon session where we all did creative and touching presentations on Metta and pure love, and finally finishing the day with the very sacred and special Welcome to Country with Alison and the Mutujulu women. I'm sure that yesterday's experiences have connected each and every one of us even more to each other, to the land, and to Metta. Now I'd like to invite our first guest speaker, Professor Shane Houston, to the stage. Now, Professor Houston is the most senior Aboriginal academic in Australia, holding the position of Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Sydney. He completed his PhD at Curtin University in 2003, graduating with a Chancellor's Commendation. He has also held a series of adjunct academic appointments, including at Curtin University and the University of Notre Dame, Sydney. Shane is a Gangulu man from central Queensland, a father and a grandfather. He has worked in Aboriginal affairs for more than 40 years, holding many roles at local, state, and national levels. Shane has worked intensely in the community sector over a number of decades, including as CEO of an Aboriginal medical service and national coordinator of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Organisation. He has also held senior executive positions in the public sector for more than 17 years. He has served on dozens of national, state, and international strategy and operational committees dealing with Aboriginal affairs, policy, and programs. In 2009, Shane was awarded the Chief Minister's Public Service Medal for meritorious and outstanding public service for his contributions aimed at improving the cultural security of services in the health sector. Shane took up his position as Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Strategy and Services at the University of Sydney in April 2011. In this role, he is tasked with making the university a central national player in bridging the social divide that confronts Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Please welcome Professor Shane Houston to the stage.
Is that on? My goodness. Thank you very much for that introduction, Venerable Mahinda. Uncle, Aunt, it's so good to see you again. Family and friends, thank you very much for the invitation to join you here today. As an academic, I spend most of my day in an office looking at numbers or looking at courses or working out how we might do a better job in a very large institution. Just last week, we enrolled another 16,500 students, bringing a total number to over 57,000 students at the university. So most of my day is taken up with numbers, with research, with the empirical side of life, things that you can count. And when the opportunity came to join you here today, it was a wonderful thing because it gave me the chance to talk about spirit. And in an academic world, spirit is something that isn't tangible. You can't empirically prove it, they say. So the opportunity to come here today was just a remarkable gift. And it was a gift not only because I get to talk to spirit, but I also get to connect to people that I have worked with in the Territory and to country in the Territory where I spent more than 10 years. It is part of our tradition to acknowledge traditional owners of country. Anangu people in this part of the country have looked after their land and their responsibilities for tens of thousands of years. And it's been encouraging to watch across Australia many organisations start to pick up the responsibility to acknowledge or welcome visitors to country. But that's had a bit of a downside as well, because in some ways people think that an acknowledgement or a welcome is just part of the political process. It's a politically correct thing to do. It's part of the order of proceedings. Just like you might tell people where the toilets are and where the food is and where the water is, you also acknowledge country. But it's not that. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for tens of thousands of years have had ceremony that is associated with seeking permission to enter and to extend the welcome to enter for people as they move from one country to another. So if Pindara people wanted to move to communities to the west with Ngarangara people, there would be ceremony attached. It wasn't just in the real world, in the physical world, that these permissions were also sought. It's also in our relationship with the spiritual world. When people in my community approach very special sites that are associated with our creation and our people, we throw rocks at the sandstone outcrops to let people know, to let spirits know that we are coming and to seek their permission to join with them on that very special place. So acknowledgements of country should not be seen as just part of the order of proceedings. It is an invitation to you all to accept the responsibilities that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people hold to care for country and to care for each other, whether they are people who live with us or people that are visiting us. A welcome to country and an acknowledgement of country is an acceptance of that responsibility. I remember many years ago, I was part of a committee that helped organise the visit of Pope John Paul II. And he had a big event here in Alice Springs. And there was some difference of opinion in the committee about who should greet the Pope. And when we asked senior Aranda people about what the answer should be, they looked at us rather quizzically and said, you know, if you're born on Yiperinya land, you're a Yiperinya child. Now that doesn't mean every child that was born in Alice Springs became Aboriginal. It meant that they had responsibilities to land, to country, to care for it, to nourish it, and to respect it. So on that decision, we had all children greet the Pope. So acknowledgements of country and the welcome that you would have received at Mutijulu, at Uluru, is an extension of that. It is an invitation. And I hope that while you're here and when you leave here, you carry with you that responsibility to care for country and to care for people that visit. As William said, I'm a Gungaloo man from central Queensland. Those who know Rockhampton, you go inland about 30 mile up the range to a little mining town, and the Dawson and Callide valleys stretch to the west and the southwest from Mount Morgan. We're a big family. If you go there and ask to meet the Houstons, people will look at you very quizzically and who are they? Because Houstons is not my family name. Houston is my dad's boxing name. And like many Aboriginal people in central Queensland, he boxed in the tents, and these were, you know, the tents that travelled the countryside, and these boxes in the tents would then be challenged by local lads, and if the local lads won, they'd win some money. If they didn't, well, they didn't. And at a very young age, Dad decided during the Second World War that he would join the Air Force. But he had no official papers because in Queensland we were still under the Act, the Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders Act. We needed permission to go places. When I was born, I was counted in the census, but then I was cast aside as not being equal to non-Aboriginal people and included in the count of cattle. That's the sort of environment that existed in Queensland. But my dad decided that he would join the Air Force underage and stand alongside other Australians to defend the country. And he did so at a time when the head of the Army, the head of the Air Force, and the head of the Navy said it was neither desirable nor required that Aboriginal people should join the armed services. But he did. And the only way he could get in was to use his boxing papers. And that's why when he enlisted, he took the name Houston, and that stuck with him in his career in the Air Force and in the Army and after he left the Army. But my father's family are the Tobys, and they're a huge family. My Uncle Gordon and Auntie Heather had 19 children. My Uncle Bill and Auntie Phyllis had 13 children. So you go home and you're walking down the street and someone will go, "Hello, Uncle," and you go, "Who are you?" And then you have to stop for a moment and then find out who they're related to. Right, that means you're, okay, I've got you now. "Nephew, how are you?" You know, and you actually have to do this very regularly. So we're a big family. And my father was responsible for giving me a lot of what I call my treasures. They're coat pegs on which I hang my life's values and journey. And he, during his time in the armed services, was also a boxer. He carried his skill in, and he was Army boxing champion. And I said, "Dad, you've got to teach me how to box." And he said, "No, son, I won't. Because you should not have to fight." He had a saying, he borrowed sayings from everywhere. He said, "Words are a poor man's weapon." So he would rather me read and be able to argue than to fight. So he would give me these coat pegs that I've been able to hang my life's journey on across my life. And I always like to thank him for that. He's no longer with us, but he still is with us in many, many ways. My mother is a non-Aboriginal woman who met my father when he was training to be a paratrooper. Dad was the first Aboriginal paratrooper in the Australian Army. He was training at Williamstown, just north of Newcastle, about 108 mile north of Sydney. And they met and they fell in love, and that was a glorious thing. And then they went home to tell my mother's parents that they'd fallen in love and they wished to marry. And my mother's parents were very happy until my father walked in the door. And at that point they said to my mother, "Paddy, if you walk out that door, don't you ever walk back in again." So she packed up her bags and she left. And she went to live in an Aboriginal community that she'd never been to before. And she had a wonderful 43 years of marriage with my father before he passed away. And I always acknowledge my mother because she too has given me these treasures. And the big treasure that she has given me is the treasure of hope. When you think about it, you can't leave your family, you can't leave everything you know unless you have this enormous well of hope on which you can draw to sustain you during those difficult times. And anyone that knows me knows I'm a cup half full sort of guy. There's always good in things. We can't always allow ourselves to be overtaken by negativity. There are positive things in life and we've got to hang on to them. And I think that's the treasure my mother has given me, this unlimited ability to hope not only that things will be better, but to maintain hope that we as people can do better. So that's who I am. And I've warned William I'll talk the leg off an iron pot and he's got to throw things at me to get off. So what I wanted to do today is talk to you a bit about nurturing spirit. Now, you would have heard yesterday and you would have read that in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lives, we have a different approach to the notion of who we are and where we are. In some societies around the world, it is the individual that is the basic unit of life, the power and responsibility of the individual. In Aboriginal communities, that is not that way. We have a sense in our communities that we are part of a much broader scheme. that we do have responsibilities, each one of us. Each of us have gifts that we use to help sustain our communities and our families. We might be good at fishing, we might be good at hunting, we might be good at ceremony. We might be good at gathering, we might be good at educating children. We might be good at remembering and painting the important stories that describe and teach others about who we are. We each have our gifts. But these gifts are not isolated or unconnected to the gifts of everyone else in your family and in your community. Different people bring different strengths. They bring their own treasures, and together we are able to do more as a people. But it goes even further than that. The animals in our life are our sisters and brothers. The plants, the environment, the sky, the water, the land are all part of our family. So we have responsibilities to them, and we also have we also have the responsibility to acknowledge that their gifts need to be nurtured and valued as well. So that in Aboriginal communities, it's not the dominance of humanity that is the most important theme. It is the interconnection between humanity, plants, animals, water, land, the sky. It is the totality of life that becomes the paramount feature of our identity. And that can often be a challenge, because some people think that it's a simple equation, Shane. Land is a resource to be exploited, and you should exploit the resource, and that will make you richer. That's what some people think. And they were surprised, and continue to be surprised in many cases, when Aboriginal communities around the countryside say, no, we're not against development, but you cannot do that, because that will destroy important features of our relationship to each other and our relationships to the land, the sky, the water, the plants and the animals. And that is often a point of some tension. But it is an important feature of who we are. The way forward in some of these circumstances is not to accept that one person has the right, or one society has the right to control everything, but to find a society in which difference is valued and which allows us to move forward collectively in a connected way. That is something that is fundamental, I think, to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander life and community. There are examples that I know where I've seen the differences misunderstood. Some people think that Aboriginal people aren't very good at keeping time. They never turn up on time. We've got an hour for this meeting, we've got to get through the agenda, Shane, just do it. And they don't understand that there is some fundamental differences in how we approach the question of time. When I was talking with Venerable Mahindra, I was making the point that Christians around the world will celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, no matter where they are, right? No matter where they are. But in many parts of Aboriginal life, our traditional business can occur anywhere between October and March. Anywhere between October and March. But it will always happen at that place, because that place is the point of connection between who we are as peoples, as a spirit, as a culture, and our relationship to our land, to the animals, the plant, the sky, and the water. Aboriginal people tend to be more place-oriented. I can remember coming to Uluru for the handover, I can't remember the date, but I can remember the people I was with, the experiences I had, and the feelings that I went away with. That's the sort of approach that you will find common in many Aboriginal communities. Now, I said earlier that I'm an academic and I tend to deal with the empirical on most days. And the idea of coming today and having a chance to talk about spirit was going to be uplifting for me. But I thought I'd go back and have a look for the evidence anyway, just to see what I could find. Not surprisingly, but in a reassuring way, I found a substantial amount of evidence from the early 1990s on that talks to this question of collective agency. The power, we all have power in ourselves to do something. But there is research that now says that when we get together, we can do so much more. And it's not just the sum of each of the individuals in the room. It's actually something greater than that. Some of the work from Stanford University has given evidence to this notion of collective agency. And in it, they come this close to talking about spirit, but they just don't say it because academics never do. Maybe except me. I'm a health economist, by the way, and one of the things that I enjoyed in my career was finding ways to incorporate Aboriginal values, spirit, in resource allocation formulas in the health sector. How can we spend our money better so that it enriches people's spirit as much as anything else? So that these academics, they came that close to talking about spirit, but they didn't. But you can read very clearly in their work this notion that we have shared values, we have shared treasures, that when we work together, that when we are together, we produce more than the sum of the number in the room. So that the 200 people in this room might be 200 people, but our power to change things and to deliver greater good might be 10-fold, 20-fold, or 30-fold that. This research was fascinating. They found not only that it worked, it was true in education systems. They found it was true in local neighbourhoods when dealing with violent crime. They found it was true in dealing with the trauma that people suffer. They found that it was true in organisations, in corporations. They found it to be true. So it's now as if the research is catching up to what we have always known, that the spirit can move things that the numbers cannot. And to me that was yet another example of some of the messages that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been sharing with Australia since I started working a good number of years ago. I was about 6 when I started. But I can remember in 1972, 71, Aboriginal communities were saying to Australia, you can't just deal with health problems by focusing on the disease. You've got to take into account employment, housing, education, cultural matters, the well-being that people hold, the reserve of well-being that rests in people and in communities. You have to take into account education, the availability of municipal services. These things are fundamental if you want to improve people's health. People thought we were a bit, bit airy-fairy and, they didn't think it was that important. 4 years later, the World Health Organization published a paper that's got a bit of fame about it now. It's called the Declaration of Alma Ata. And in it, they say exactly the things that Aboriginal people were telling Australian health systems 4 years earlier. Exactly the thing. In 1989, Aboriginal communities again spoke out about the need for us to think more carefully about how we plan and deliver health services. I use the health examples because they're the ones I'm most familiar with. And they published a report in 1989, a National Aboriginal Health Strategy, that pointed to the need for us to more carefully integrate different components of life, including culture and well-being. And now if you look at the direction of health systems in Australia today, you'll see validation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's thinking way back then in what we propose to do now. So there are a number of points that I'll summarise for you. I'm conscious of time. Oh, okay, good. I can talk forever. Okay, I'll keep going. You'll be sorry. But I'll give you one promise. I'm not going to sing, you know. I sound like two marbles rolling around in a tin, you know. Not real good. I'm a real Patsy Cline fan, and, you know, Sam Cooke and Charlie Pride, you know, Wings of a Dove and Snow, you know, Crystal Chandelier, you know. But I think I knew those before I knew the national anthem, you know. But I'm not going to sing. So, what is it about spirit? How do we find ways of allowing people to admit to themselves that this is important? How do we find ways of getting stodgy academics to admit that this notion of spirit is important to the goals that they set for the education of our young people, and therefore the shape of services and the shape of administration, the shape of government, the shape of our businesses, the shape of our social life? How do we engage people in a process which will allow them to admit to themselves, to be open to the idea that it's okay to talk about spirit? You know, when I moved to the University of Sydney, I thought that was going to be a challenge. I'd spent 10 years here in the Territory working with people who continue to amaze me in their richness of generosity, their kindness of spirit, and their dogged determination to continue. Just thinking about the research, the Stanford research, that also pointed out that richness of spirit, this notion of collective agency, the coming together of people being greater than the sum of its parts, actually helps us not only with things like education systems and violence in our local neighbourhoods, but it helps us ride out the rough spots in life as well. Those peaks and troughs that life is always, that always feature in our lives. And as I was thinking about what I might speak about today, I got word of the terrible death of a young girl in the Kimberley, a young 10-year-old girl who had suicided. And people said to me, "This is outrageous, Shane. What should we do? How can we move forward?" And they're saying, "It's going to take generations, Shane." I said, "No, it's not. It does not have to take generations." The notion of collective spirit can deliver, collective agency can deliver incredible results. And I know this to be true because I have watched other communities struggle with suicide. Communities not far from here in the north over the 2003 to about 2012, in the early part of that decade, had a peak in youth suicide in their communities. It was a horrible, horrible thing. It devastated that community. The response by government was to put 32 bureaucrats in a plane and fly them over. And I'm thinking, well, what's that going to change? The community didn't want them, and they said, "Shane, what should we do?" I said, "Well, tell them not to come." "Oh, can we do that?" "Yes." So they did. They said, "Don't bother coming, we're going to sort this out." So groups of people in their community, men and women, elders in their community, sat and talked. Not over a long, long time, but over about 3 weeks. And they identified the things that they would do for each other to make sure that they got control of the number of suicides in their community. You know the sort of things that they did? They said, you know, we know that if people go to school, there's less chance of them, you know, if they do well at school, less chance of suicide. So some of the old people in that community every morning got on the school bus. And when the school bus went around the community, oh no, Joey's still asleep. The old fella would get off the bus and you'd go into that house, get up young boy, you're going to school. And that young boy got up and went to school. They said things like, if someone says, oh, I'm going to kill myself, and they walk off, you don't just sit there and panic. Someone goes with them and talks to them and shares with them and knows they're not alone. Someone else in the group goes to the clinic. Someone else in the group goes to the police. It was what they were going to do for each other that was going to make the difference. And not surprisingly for many, some of the bureaucrats it was a surprise because they thought what you needed were psychologists, psychiatric care, good interventions of that nature. But the notion of using spirit, our collective agency, to help people was what delivered the real results. Suicide went like that. In a very short period of time, rates of suicide in these communities plummeted. Absolutely plummeted. And that was a joy to behold. Not only have they saved many, many young people's lives, but they were also able to improve education. They were able to do so many other things because they had taken the time to do things for others. And that's not a surprise for Aboriginal people because our society is based in many ways on doing things for others. I might catch the fish, or I might catch scrub fowl, or I might catch the turkey, but it's not necessarily mine to own. Others will take it, they'll prepare it, they'll share the benefit of that amongst the families and communities. So sharing and doing for others is part of what Aboriginal culture is about. So that's how it seems, that is how it is. And I know when I was asked the other night, what can we do? I said first that we can go and work with communities. Listen to the examples like the one I've just given you about communities to the north of here. Learn from that and find ways that we can take that local experience. And if you can imagine it in this way, as I do, that you saw this community wrap their arms around all their members. If you can take that local experience and you can generalise it in communities across Australia, you will get a sense that I think we can do much, much more than we have been able to do. We don't have to rely on the empirical world of the academics, of the doctors, of those groups of people who bring great skill and treasure to our endeavours, but they are not the only answer. There is perhaps, and the research is now starting to show, that this notion of collective agency, this notion of people being more than the sum of their parts, offers great to the potential of a society to deal with the challenges that it faces and to lift the joy in the community beyond levels that they might otherwise think possible. So that's the sort of experience that I have seen with joy and with culture and with sharing in our communities. And it's not just the academics that I have to convince or that we have to convince about this. It is about us convincing many, many others. And I know this to be possible as well. I've watched very senior doctors, one here in Alice Springs. Alison might know an old guy not with us now, Dr. Trevor Cutter. And he was a Collins Street trained physician from Melbourne, very, very well thought of physician. He came to work at the Central Australian Aboriginal Congress here in Alice Springs and he was going to be there for 6 months and he spent 26 years. But he was able to adapt the clinical skill that he had been taught in his medical training to embrace more of the culture and spirit of Aboriginal people and find new pathways where clinical care could be delivered that respected Aboriginal people's values and our culture and our identities. And we can point to many other people around the countryside, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people alike, who have stepped up and been willing to admit to themselves that the possibility of collective agency, of spirit, that it could help us change not only the circumstance for that family or that neighbourhood or that community, but for the whole country and beyond. That's the sort of potential that rests in an appreciation of collective agency, of spirit, and a boldness of people who are prepared to admit to themselves that it can make and does make a real difference. I should finish because I've talked enough, but there's just, I'm an old man. I'm a grandfather, and I keep saying to my, I've got to tell you this story. In my family, all of my grandmother's sisters are my grandmothers, right? So I have biggest mob of grandmothers. And when my grandmother passed away, Auntie Elvie stepped in and she became my grandmother. And I was talking to her one day, and we were talking about Aboriginal affairs, because I was, keen to work in that area. And we were talking about the 1967 referendum, when in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, when their discriminatory provisions in our founding constitution that punished Aboriginal people were removed. And I was talking to her about that, and I said, "Oh, what should we do, Aunt?" I called her Aunt. "What should we do, Aunt?" And she said to me, "Oh, breed up. That's what you've got to do. Breed up." And I looked at her very quizzically and I said, "Why?" She said, "We need the votes." So this old woman who grew up at Cherbourg Mission in Queensland was as smart as a penny, that one. She knew exactly what to say. So I've seen many things change in my lifetime, and I remain supremely confident that the collective agency, that the spirit of people will change the world. In my own job, I was just talking earlier that when I left the Territory and went to work in Sydney, people said to me, "Are you sure you want to do that? Sydney's a bit of a, Sydney, University of Sydney's a snake pit, mate, And I said, no, off I went. And I went knowing that there would be people who had good minds and good hearts, and that I could find those people and that we could do things. And we started to talk with the university, 57,000 students, 10,000 staff, and I was amazed, not that of the response that I got, but the passion of the response that I got. Because as I worked my way around the university, talking to faculties and professional service units and student bodies and alumni and other people that were involved in the university community, and I'd say to them, "We're going to do some great things in Aboriginal affairs, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander higher education, and we think you should get involved." And their response was, "You mean we've got permission to get involved?" Because it is almost as though they had not been able to admit to themselves that they had a role to play. And some of the constraints that stopped them from thinking anew about their contribution came from within inside the university, it came from inside Aboriginal politics, it came from inside a whole range of different areas. And then when we said to them, "Yes, we want you involved," they didn't believe us. So we had to spend the next 3 or 4 years proving to the university community that we were serious, that we believed that the collective agency, that the spirit and the whole of the university could produce remarkable results in an area that had not thus far been able to do so. Next Thursday and Friday and Saturday, I've got to present to the University Senate, the governing board of the university, our 4-year report. And it's rather surprising, because the first thing that I asked people to do was to list everyone that was involved. I didn't want a list of people who were peripherally involved. Who are the champions that you know of in the university who are out there really doing it? 1,063 people. 1,063 people. And then we looked at the results. And in an environment where the university was struggling to attract Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, the number of Aboriginal students commencing at the university each year has risen by 46%. The number of staff employed at the university has risen by 60%. The proportion, the size of the Aboriginal community as a proportion of the university student body has increased by just over 30%. Our outreach services to young people in communities between January and February last year and January, February this year, we run a Your Tutor, it's called. So young people come and they get connected, because some of the schools that our kids go to aren't the best schools, right? So we've got to do more to help those young people realise their full potential. So we have this tutorial service. That tutorial service grew by over 1,000% in 12 months. The university people, those over 1,000 people, 1,063 people, who had put their hand up and who said, oh, I don't necessarily believe that he wants me involved, but I'm going to give it a go, they have delivered a remarkable result. A remarkable result. And to me, it is yet again confirmation that this notion that together we can deliver something more joyful and something more lasting by doing it as a whole, and recognising that the whole is not just the people, it is about our responsibilities to each other, those that are near, those people who visit us, our responsibilities to our land, to our plants, to our animals, to our water and to our sky. And if we do that well, the future for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I also think for humankind and the globe more broadly, I think is a truly promising one. Thank you all for the opportunity to talk with you today.
Thank you, Professor Shane Houston. Please give another warm round of applause for Professor Shane. Now, Professor Shane is on a very busy schedule. He has to leave back to go to Sydney this afternoon. So because of that, we'd like to show our appreciation for Professor Shane flying all the way out here just for this conference, really, and taking time out of his busy schedule. So we'd like to present him with a small gift of appreciation. I could invite Venerable Mahinda to pass the gift bag to Professor Shane. Founding teacher of the Zen Open Circle in Sydney, Australia. She is also a teacher for the Melbourne Zen Group, conducting a number of sessions, 7-day retreats in both cities each year. She also teaches in Hobart. She is the Dharma heir of John Tarrant Roshi of the Pacific Zen Institute and Ross Bolater Roshi of the Diamond Sangha Robert Aitken, in a lay lineage that draws Soto and Rinzai koan style of practice together. Susan is also a writer, radio producer, and film director, as well as teaching and mentoring writing in private consultation and occasional meditation and writing retreats. She taught film for many years at the University of Technology, Sydney, has co-written 3 books on film, and directs the annual Buddhist Film Festival in Sydney, established in 2003. She has a special interest in the way Zen and Indigenous Australian sense of care for country come together, co-leading occasional retreats in country with Dulamunun Uncle Max Harrison, the Yuin Yelder, who is here today also. Susan is the author of the book Upside Down Zen, and her latest book is Mining the Earth, Mending the World, the Offer We Can No Longer Refuse, a Zen response to our slow-burning planetary emergency. So please welcome Dr. Susan Murphy Roshi to the stage. I'll just add that her topic of her talk today is May all beings be at ease, bringing loving kindness down to earth.
Is this working? No.
Is the wireless on? The lapel on? Do you want to just tap it? Do you just want to tap it? Let me see.
No, it's not working. I can use this if you like. Is this working?
We'll take this away. I'll take this now.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here in this most beautiful heart of our country. And I don't know about you, but every time I've come to this part of the country, just as the plane touches down, I find tears in my eyes. It's like there's something so elemental about the sense of almost uncanny belonging that you feel as an Australian, and I hope as a visitor as well, when you come to the red heart of Australia. And I was very pleased, although Shane has had to leave, I was very pleased that he brought up collective agency so strongly, because I've been, the book that was mentioned, Minding the Earth, Mending the World, excuse me, is very much about the civilizational crisis that Venerable Mahinda has been speaking about. And I guess you could say it's something like a Dharma response to that question of how can I help? What can be done? This deep question that I think is in everybody. We know that things are very wrong in our world. And there are no superheroes. There's not going to be superheroes who are going to come and put it right. There's only all of us. And so that sense of collective agency is vital. We can't do anything but depend and rely upon each other and upon the connectedness that has been spoken about already many times during the last few days. That connectedness is greater than us individually. But I want to also draw today towards the question, not just to take us in the direction of the civilizational crisis that we're facing, but I also want to bring it towards the sense of personal responsibility within that. And one of the people who has inspired me, let me just backtrack and explain who I am, because for a start, a lot of people have asked me, what is a Roshi? What does that mean? In fact, Virgin Airlines asked me as well, because it was on my ticket. And they said, this does not correspond with your surname. So I had to say, well, it's a very difficult thing to explain. It translates, in fact, as Zen master or senior teacher. And although I stand here not in my formal teaching robes, because I actually represent a lay lineage of practice. For the last 5 or 6 generations of the lineage in which I am, in which I practice, and in which I teach. It has been a lay lineage. Is this giving feedback, or is it sounding okay? Bit of feedback. Maybe I'll put it there. Is that better? Okay. So I like to think of this as a monastery without walls. That's where I practice, a monastery without walls. When we are conducting Zen retreats, we make sure that we practice in a monastic style, following the principles of frugality, of not wasting, of taking care of every single detail with great awareness. And so that's a lovely practice. I actually debated wearing robes and my fancy rakusu, but I do want to uphold the fact that practice does not stop anywhere. You know, it's part of every part of our lives. I also want to say, in that spirit in which Shane introduced himself, that I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I have a deeply sort of almost visceral sense, bodily sense, of how important it is that we become critically and exquisitely aware of how important it is right now to respond to the world in crisis where we find ourselves. So there's no superheroes, and yet each of us has a genius of response. So what is the relationship of loving kindness practice, of loving kindness to the whole planetary emergency, of climate change? Maybe it's the desk. Of climate change and of the overwhelming demands we've been placing upon the earth. And that is our home, and it is our source of all life. Earth is our home. It seems strange to even have to say it, and yet you don't ransack your home. You don't trash it. You don't allow it to catch fire. You don't treat it with indifference. You don't act as though you're not even a kind of fundamental guest of this home. Everything here is a guest of Earth. Earth herself is a guest of the universe. And everything is a gift of impermanence, even us. But what kind of guests are we? Sometimes I wonder if we even bother to become quiet enough to tune in to the subtle, deep conversation of our home place, of our Earth. When I was writing the book, I came upon an anonymous post on a website discussion. It just simply said this: Earth is where we all live. Earth sustains us. Earth allows us to be here temporarily. Like a good guest, we respect our host and all the beauty and bounty we're lucky to experience. We do no harm, and then we leave. And it's pretty hard to argue with, actually. It's a very simple description of the fundamental courtesy that something called a home asks of us. There's something I've taken part in from time to time that Joanna Macy, who some people here may have heard of, a great Western Buddhist teacher and ecologist. She's done a lot of work with despair and empowerment in places like after Chernobyl. She travels to places where, and I know that Charika knows about her, she said at one point, and together with an Australian called John Seed, we need to create a kind of ceremony of awareness about how there are other guests alongside us. And so they created something called the Council for All Beings. And this is a kind of improvisational, playful process, but a very deep play, in which you allow yourself to let something identify you as needing a voice. It may be another species. There may be a species that we regard as a pest. It may be a river that is being polluted. It may be a mountain that is being flattened or mined, or any kind of part of the earth's great weave of life which is voiceless and yet crying out. And so what you do in this process, it might take days, sometimes you might just stage this just in an afternoon, and it's a beautiful process. People meditate upon the being that has called them to attention, and then you do what you can to embody that. Bring that being to a council for all beings. So that's a formal process in which everybody gathers, all the various creatures. Sometimes we make masks or paint up in a way that will help us completely feel our way in and in a sense, become the face of that being. And then one by one, the beings are invited to speak. And in a sense, what they're speaking to are the humans who are not listening. So we become the beings speaking to the humans who cannot hear easily. So busy, with this. And so that's a way in which you can let the cry of the earth through you in a very deeply personal and particular way. And one of the beautiful things that came out of one that I did with some people in New Zealand a couple of years ago, at the end of a Dharma gathering that brought all the streams of Buddhist Dharma together, was we had two people, no one knows until we get there who each other are. They're mysterious beings. We all are, and they are. So at a certain point, towards the end of the process, after many rich things had happened and presentations had been made by the various beings, and there were children present, and they loved all this, one person who had identified as a frog, speaking for frogs, said, there's a very simple message. These are my parting words. Love it, love it, love it, love it. And there was another person on the other side who had also been a frog, another species of frog, also imperiled. And that frog chirped up, live it, live it, live it. So love it, live it. That is really, what metta practice is asking of us, not just to radiate the kindness, but to live that kindness. Thich Nhat Hanh, who many people would know, a great Vietnamese Zen teacher who deserves our thought right now because he's in a very fragile state of health and right at the end of his life. Is he still working? Yeah. He once said that he had a conversation with the earth. This was his way of speaking about a deep meditation upon the very question I'm hoping we can explore. And I think we are exploring actively here. So what he said was, he asked himself, he asked the earth. Deep in his meditation, he asked the earth, can I rely on you? And I think this touches into the... Is it still working? It sounds different. This touches into the kind of doubt that I think we live with. Have we pushed the earth too far? Have we used up all the goodwill of the earth? Can we rely on the earth not to turn against us like an accountant who's kept a completely meticulous record of all the excess that we've heaped upon the earth? So he asked this question very deep in his heart, can I rely on you, the earth? And the response came back, also deep within his heart. The earth said to him and to us, can I rely on you? So he took that question back into his meditation and again, very soberly examined himself. Can I rely on myself? And he was able to respond in time to the earth, and he said, "You can mostly rely on me." The earth held its breath, or he held his breath while he waited for the earth to respond. And the reply from the earth was, "You can mostly rely on me." It's no accident that there's a complete and beautiful mirroring here. You know, we are in a complete kind of mirror-neuron relationship with the earth. It is us, we're it. So there's no separation here, but there's also a quite acute sense of responsibility, of taking responsibility. Just as Shane spoke about people collectively saying, not this is what we need, but this is what we will do. This is what we can do. This is what we will do. So I think becoming more reliable is very much the essence of all practice in which you offer yourself to, in a sense, the very best, deepest part of who we are. And we say, let me serve that. I mean, that's what discipline really means. It means to become a disciple of that part of ourselves, a follower. So metta is said to be, in the words of the Metta Sutta, the sublime abiding. In other words, the most complete and joyful place in which we can live, abide. Not just live, but abide has the sense of being deeply at peace and in harmony, a beautiful fit. So this is a clue to where we can make a true and enduring kind of home, become more reliable. I mean, home is a place where we are sustained, sheltered, able to rest, be at ease, and be known, be confidently known. You know, at home, we confidently offer love to others, and we know ourselves to be loved. And that's a little bit what's missing with our sense of being slightly alienated by our own actions from this complete fit, this beautiful fit with the earth. So if loving kindness, if unbounded love, boundless and radiant love, if that's the sublime or surpassing place in which we can rest with ease and be at ease, this really enjoins us to see that it guides us to see that the only way to fully accept the gift of a rare human life is to study, to understand, to practice, deeply establish, almost as first nature in ourselves, and to set in motion this flow of generous, inclusive, loving kindness. It's a beautiful fact that the words of the Metta Sutta speak of, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless loving heart. Now, does this not evoke the fact that this is the earth, our only earth? So with a boundless loving heart, we must cherish it, just as we would protect, as a mother would protect our child, our only child. The earth and the land don't belong to us. The great teaching of this place where we've come to learn and meditate is that we belong to it. We are all born here on the earth. We're all indigenous to the earth. It's not hard to find our way to that indigenous strength of connection if we drop our kind of apologetic self-doubt and say, I'm born here. I belong. That belonging then has to be, in a sense, more deeply understood, more explored and more acted. You act upon it by exploring it. You explore it by acting upon it. So the idea of belonging can remain a kind of nice idea. It's not necessarily easy or comfortable to make that a serious idea, to take the idea seriously and to put it into practice, even though that very mindset, the set of mind involved in belonging, is in sense, it's an invitation back in to the ease of belonging. We have a practice we sometimes use when people are first new to meditation, where we invite them to, on the in-breath, just be completely aware of your body, this precious body, that belongs here completely, breathing in, sharing the breath of the earth. And on the out-breath, to allow the words, "You are welcome here," to just be part of that long out-breath, and to resonate in that space after the breath is completed and before the next breath wants to arise, to rest in, "You are welcome here." And I invite you to see that as a kind of way of holding this loving openness. Because the mysterious thing that happens is this: when you offer the words to whatever is in you right at that moment, whatever thought, half thought, feeling, sensation, the air on your face, the sound of a bird, the weight of your body, the warmth of your body, whatever it is that is part of that awareness at that moment, when you breathe the words, "You are welcome here," welcoming whatever is just as yourself. In the same way, you find yourself saying or realizing you can only offer those words when you are at home. You are the welcomer. You are welcoming things, everything just as it is. And you are the host as well as the guest. Host and guest become hard to tell apart. The welcomer and the one welcomed. Impossible to tell apart. And so you begin to see, there's a kind of letting go of yourself when you make whatever guest is present welcome. You don't demand things of a guest. You make room for the guest. So there's a generosity and there's a flow to and fro in that practice, which is full of, it is a kind of action of loving kindness, to welcome. In the record of Zen, there's a moment where a teacher was asked urgently by somebody, in times of great difficulty, when times of great difficulty visit us, how should we meet them? And his response was just one word. He just simply said, "Welcome." As long as we're resisting with fear and a sense of alienation, we can't even begin to hear the conversation of the earth and the cries of the earth. We're too intent upon our fear of, can we rely on, anything, in a kind of moment in our human unfolding where there's an almost vertigo feeling, I think. A lot of young, exceptionally young people I talk to say they don't know what the future is. They can't sense the horizon of the future with any confidence. They don't know what it will be, what's coming over that horizon. So even more in that situation, we need to soften into where we are and what we are, know it, and from there be able to come forth. An old Hasidic teacher was who had died. His students were talking. This is from another tradition. This is the Jewish Hasidic tradition. After he died, his students sat around remembering him and asking swapping stories. And one of them said, he used to go down to the pond every night and stay there for a long time. What was he doing down at the pond? And someone else said, he was learning the song with which the frogs praise God. And then he added, it takes a long time to learn that song. So we're in an emergency, but we must act as though we're deeply at home. We must have that sense it takes a long time to learn that song, but we're prepared to offer long time to the practice of being here. And luckily everything is open to us the moment we turn towards it. Trees and rocks and rivers and sky and earth and all the creatures to whom our highly technological and technologized, if that's a word, our life has become so sort of carried up in technology. It's as though that has turned its back upon the fabric of the living earth, as though that doesn't matter. Yet all the time they offer themselves. They respond. We can respond and join the conversation and deepen, wise up with that. And love is the further way in. So I'm saying that we need to rediscover how much we're part of a vast communion, not just community, but ongoing communion of subjects. We and everything around us is not a collection of objects or an inventory of resources awaiting our use. Someone else, David Abram is his name, a philosopher in America, pointed out that once you take the word re off resource, you immediately return it to its true meaning, source. So whether it's minerals or water or air, the earth itself, the plants, the rocks, these are all the source of all that we are, and indeed all that our technology is as well, the source. And you don't trample on the source. You don't treat it as a kind of, certainly you don't treat it as an infinite, something to grab at with infinite abandon. So even when we're lost in the kind of online space, you know, that spaceless space of online, being online, even then, when we're lost in some infinite distraction, what I just mentioned is still the source of all that we are. And so we need to sort of get these different parts of ourselves all back home together, back here completely. So metta really is the practice of loving interconnectedness. There's, I'm not sure that she's still alive, but Auntie Beryl, a Nyantipa woman from Broken Hill, once said to me, if you're not in connectedness, you're not in reality. You're actually somewhere floating outside reality. Connectedness is reality, she said. If you're not in it, you're not in reality. So metta is not just a deep kind of coming home, it's a revelation of this connectedness and the practice of living it more deeply aware. So the ignorance of believing that we're separate is what has been tearing and fraying and pulling down this whole life-giving weave of our world. So our lifestyles of too much want and too little regard, you know, are profoundly lacking in any understanding of the fundamental accord that there is constantly between all beings. In a sense, every single life says to every other life on earth, your life is also my life. And so in human beings, that realization is loving kindness and lived compassion. Not just love it, love it, love it, but live it, live it, live it. And to live outside that is not just to injure all living beings with a kind of extraordinary indifference, but it is to injure this living being, ourselves, with an extraordinary indifference. Practice is the dropping of indifference in the most essential way we can do that. So metta brings down the walls in the heart, and it brings down the barriers between each other, and it dissolves the whole fundamental no barrier that exists between self and other. It dissolves it. And it makes it much harder to fall back into indifference. It undoes the word enemies. At its deepest level, it even undoes the word fear. It's very hard for fear to survive when we relax as deeply as metta invites us to do. We are welcome here. You, whatever form is appearing in front of you, whatever is calling on you at any moment, you are welcome here. And of course that welcomes the other completely. So it is a discipline of not building walls in the mind or heart, and where you find them, taking them down. It's not necessarily an easy thing to maintain. That's why it's called practice. One of the people I admire deeply from many years ago, when I've had a long academic life as well. I taught in universities for 20 years, and early in that period I was very influenced by the great, I guess you'd call him a teacher rather than a philosopher of pedagogy, of educational teaching. Paulo Freire was his name, and Paulo Freire was working in some of the most hard-pressed and oppressed communities in Latin America. And towards the end of his life, I should mention, he wrote a book called A Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Not a pedagogy telling you how to help the oppressed, but a pedagogy that arises out of the collective agency, the collective genius of people who suffer. In a sense, it's the wisdom that grows out of suffering is the wisdom that became what his book was about, the pedagogy of the oppressed. The best way to teach people literacy was to study at their feet, he discovered. Sit at their feet and learn, and then co-create with them the way that literacy could enter and empower people. So at the end of his life, he was asked by somebody, what is the most important thing? And he replied, the beautiful daily struggle to be congruent. Now, the word congruent is interesting because it actually comes from geometry, and from a geometry point of view, are two congruent shapes completely fit each other. It's a perfect fit, congruent. So, congruent is a word to explore, I think. But what I most admire about that response was the fact that he dared to put together the words beautiful and struggle. And the fact that he admitted with great humility that it's daily, it arises every day. And to be congruent is, to come home, to be a complete fit with circumstances. So I think we can see that while there are aspects of being human that make us especially lucky, we regard a human life as rare and precious. I mean, if that seems like a strange statement when there are more than 7 billion of us, remember there's at least 7 billion beings living on each of us. So a human life is regarded as rare and precious. Why? Partly because it can be so remarkably aware. I sometimes think of human beings as the kind of collecting point, the rich, responsive collecting point of all the forms of sentience on the earth. We watch a tiger, and tigerness enters us. We, in a sense, draw in these. We can, in a sense, be taught by, informed by, and even subtly formed by the spirit of tiger. We know what tigerness is the moment you've seen a tiger. You can find out more about that by accidentally straying into their cage. But nevertheless, there's that power of the tiger. And there's actually an interesting tiger koan that comes from the Korean Zen tradition. It's a very interesting, mysterious one. I'm not going to try and unpack it, but I'll give it to you. A koan, by the way, is part of Zen practice. In a sense, koans are words that are spoken from being completely at home, a perfect fit. And to find your way into the mind of the koan is to find your way into that more complete fit. So it invites you in. It makes it difficult to bring your ordinary kind of mind to bear. It turns that upside down. So here's the koan. The koan is this. The tiger fears the human heart. The human fears the tiger's kindness. It's probably not so hard to see why a tiger might fear a human heart, to the point where a human can be so indifferent, human beings can be so indifferent that there are very few tigers left on earth in their home, where they live. So what is it in the human heart that allows such a kind of strange indifference to the wholeness of the weave of life? There's that side of it. But even more interesting maybe, and more searching, is why does the human fear the tiger's kindness? What is the tiger's kindness? One way of understanding that is probably exactly what Paulo Freire was talking about. It is a beautiful daily struggle to be fully human, to be a complete fit with this precious human life. The tiger's kindness might be part of that difficulty. It might also be our fear, our fundamental fear, that what is here now, by its very nature, will disappear. Even this being that each of us are. Because we are here, we know with complete and reliable certainty we will not be here. The tiger's kindness may well be the fact that every breath is so richly full of possibility, and the fact of being here is extraordinary. And the kindness of the tiger is that even that is going to disappear, and if it didn't, if impermanence was not constantly allowing us to be one thing and then another, if impermanence was not us, what would any of this matter? How could it possibly reach us? It is very much the fact that all things pass so quickly away, that we care deeply, and that metta, for example, becomes so important. It is exactly what comes to meet the tiger's kindness. Love meets the tiger's kindness. Love can embrace our own mortality. It can embrace our fear. And right now I think the earth is presenting us, as Thich Nhat Hanh and his example shows us, the earth is presenting us with a great koan, in a way. How do we respond to this kind of crisis, which can become a great healing crisis of the earth? A crisis can heal. A crisis shows up what is so wrong, what has been so damaging, what has been either intentional or mindless damage is suddenly hard to avoid noticing. So there's a sense that, the koan of the earth is asking us, how do we become the intimate partner to this great change that is going on? It's such a challenge, it can sort of bind us, make us feel helpless. This is something that I'd like to read you the way that the poet he at one point was the poet laureate of America, Robert Hass. He said this, and it's almost like a koan of the way the earth is now asking us to look so deeply at ourselves. He said, "We are the only protectors, and we are the thing that needs to be protected. And we are what it needs to be protected from." You could almost say that the first two parts of that, the sense of being the only protectors, or at least the protectors, the caretakers, and also the thing that needs to be protected, is the sense of the earth and the human protecting each other, caretaking each other, is very strong in Indigenous understanding. And it's not remote from any of us. We're all Indigenous in the sense of born here, born on the earth. The earth's wisdom is in us if we care to find it. But the last part of that, we are the only protectors, we are the thing that needs to be protected, and we are what it needs to be protected from, seems to point to the moment that is right now. We are what it needs to be protected from. How did we get into this position, where on every side our responsibility, and the responsibility we need to take and the responsibility for damage we need to own, is on every side of us? From one point of view, it can sort of feel like a hopeless bind. What can we do? Inaction, we start to feel helpless or paralysed. But actually what that's describing is, in a way, what every single ecology manifests. Every ecological system is a mutual set of relationships in which protecting, being protected from, and offering protection are all part of these relationships. I think you could almost say collective agency is inspired by those words of Robert Hass. If you don't accept it as, or feel that you must shrink back from that proposition that he made there, you can begin to see that at every point we are the active point of this you could almost call it, it's almost like a sort of set of lights lighting up. We're in every single one of those. If we are fearful, can I just ask how much time I've got, Will? 10 minutes? Yeah. Okay. So if we shrink back, we can get to the point of almost acting as though it's not happening. I mean, a lot of what is in front of us right now is a sense of a vast looking away. And I was speaking earlier to someone at the conference about the extraordinary moment that is recorded in the journal, the diary of Joseph Banks, Sir Joseph Banks as he became, who was the botanist on board the Endeavour with James Cook. When he, on the Endeavour, the little ship that floated into Botany Bay, when at that moment he records in his diary that there were people fishing out on one of the little spits of land that went out into Botany Bay. They were fishing from rocks, with spears. The Endeavour passed within eyeball sight of each other. These two worlds that can hardly countenance each other, were just 20 feet away from each other. And he records the remarkable fact that the people fishing on the rocks, they clearly saw the boat and they looked away. They looked down to their fishing and they acted as though that boat was not part of the world at all. It was not able to be integrated into that world. Some people have called this the idea of the hyper-object, something that is outside the frame of the recognisable, too big and impossible within the scale and the reference of a human life. And from one point of view, the kind of big crisis facing our civilization is a little like that. It's almost too big to accept, to give formal diplomatic recognition to it. And also it's outside the scale of a human life. People almost hopefully cross their fingers and think, well, maybe it won't be in my lifetime. Maybe it'll be a little bit off. But of course, it's in our children's lifetime, it's in our descendants' lifetime. Even if it's not in ours, but it is, it's happening now. We've just been through the hottest March on record. We can't pretend any longer that this great hyper object is, we can't pretend it's not here. Alongside that, I think we have the problem that someone described as our mental lives becoming ever more fragmented, to the point where it's hard to know how a coherent self is being maintained. I was speaking to various people in the conference, and a number of people have been talking about how much the digital revolution that we're part of is actually a kind of chasm between one kind of life and another, and that the children of the iPhone generation live in a different and a rather savage and frightening world. A lot of teenage suicides are coming out of this sort of life that passes between people in a very fragmented sense. It's almost like the digital connectivity has become a nervous system. Our actual nervous system has been externalized and is vulnerable to any kind of harsh words or attack. There's a lot of unconsidered speech going on the internet. And so a self that can act in the world according to settled purposes and long-form ongoing projects becomes, from one point of view, a worry. Can that still be sustained, in this fragmented world? So all the more the importance of offering metta to this troubled and, I guess you could almost say, a nervous system that is juddery and fearful, that we share as human beings. Each of us are the ones who are here to discover the answer to this great koan of the earth. I'd like to come back to, before finishing, to the words of the Buddha on the importance of love. He said these words: "It is in this way that we must train ourselves, by the self through love." He went on and said, we will develop love, we will practice it, we will make it both a way and a basis. We will take our stand upon it, store it up, and thoroughly set it going. I think that is powerful, comprehensive presentation of all that's involved in this shared responsibility and response that sets the responsibility in motion. All of those injunctions grow active as they proceed. They're practical. They are to be practiced. Every one of us, it's up to us to discover what we can do, how we can train ourselves by the self through love to be of some use. Metta becomes the kind of wellspring we can draw on. If we're facing this beautiful daily struggle, to be congruent, to be a good fit, a helpful fit with circumstances that change rapidly, the speed of light every day. So constant, beautiful and daily struggle. Metta is like what fills back up the well. Lets us see resentful or selfish feelings more clearly and be less compelled by them. become more actually sensitive to painful things, to willful, mindless aggression. Because greed, hatred and ignorance are in fact all forms of aggression towards each other, towards the earth. And then I think we can, knowing that that wellspring is there and it's constantly available, that we can then take that into the practical circumstances of this ongoing struggle to be congruent. And that means quite humble, ordinary, relative things, like constantly looking honestly at our own lives. After all, metta practice clearly reveals us to ourselves. We can see where it opens us. We can see where we shrink back. We can see our fears and our unease, our own unease more clearly. We can see where we can't easily open, widen, let the self loose, let those boundaries soften, and let the walls in the mind and heart come down. So it comes down to very simple things like, the ordinary business of actually loving each other just as we are, offering help and encouragement and support and food, clothing, better laws, more honest political arrangements that will protect all beings and the earth, and working for this, small projects, big projects, as part of the project of awakening without end. So it's important that we don't lose sight of the immensely loving difference between suffering and trying to cope on one hand, and the beautiful daily struggle of conscious self-training, which really does, that's what a practice is, which really does rest on the loving truth that when we open most widely, there is no self. There's no self and no other to be found opposing that no self. And that undividedness that is at our core, that is what got us here into this life, this body, this sense of self. And that is what we can trust. We can rely on that. It does require patience. Remember, it takes a long time to learn the Song of the Frogs. And it does take an urgent heart. The work is ordinary and it is great. Great in the sense that it does, for the first time ever on the earth, clearly ask all of us to recognize each other. We are all of us the answer to the koan that the earth is posing. And so the fact that the work is great, then, in the sense of formidable as well, means it calls on the very best parts of ourselves. That's the only thing that can come to meet it. So I sometimes think of the people who put their bodies on the line, who protest in a way that they do with great care to do no harm. I think of the people who are saying, no, this must stop, this excess, this aggressive greed and mindless consumption. When they say this must stop, they're acting like the planet's antibodies. Its immune system finally kicking in. So I think we can recognize that beautiful response in ourselves when we let it in as indeed a greater offer to the earth to say to her, our mother, you can rely on us. You can rely on me. As far as I can possibly offer myself, you can rely on me. So although we've been tardy in meeting the long, long, endless welcome that the earth has extended to us, although we've been distracted and alienated, nevertheless, we have inside us the source of and the way to recognize brilliant forms of sanity. In a sense, the greater the challenge, the more insane the crisis that we're facing, the more brilliant the sanity it calls up in us, and brilliant responsibility. So I'd like to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Susan, for your words of wisdom. We'd also like to offer you a small gift bag in appreciation for you taking the time to come here. So if you wouldn't mind standing up and on behalf of the committee from here. Yeah. Yes. So everyone put their hands together again for Dr. Susan. So now's the time everyone's been waiting for today, lunch. So lunch will start at 11:15. So just a couple of quick things. It's going to be in the same room as yesterday, so the Winari room, which is just opposite here in the round tables. I'd ask that if people could make space for the speakers and the Sangha and elderly first to take their lunch. And again, if not all 200 of you can kind of line up, just kind of space it out, that would be great. The next thing you need to know is we just need to be back here at 12:30 for the next session to start. So you'll have free time after lunch. Feel free to do whatever you need to. During the time during lunch, this room will be closed. We're just doing some additional testing of sound and things. So if you could take your bags outside with you, that'd be fantastic. Okay, thank you.